Hi everyone, this is our last lecture series for our course. It's on chapter 7, which is called Darwinian Evolution. Evolution, of course, is the change of a species over time. Those that are best suited for the environment will survive, the weak will die. Charles Darwin is his name in this picture right here. He was from the 1800s, where there was still a very heavy church and God thought in science as well. And he was one of the scientists coming out saying, well, I don't think it's all God that's changing species over time, that there must be something else going on. So he had some thoughts with some other scientists of that time period about how fossils came about, how we can discover fossils in the ground of organisms that are no longer here, and that it must have evolved over time. So he was a big naturalist. He liked to study the natural world is what that meant. He didn't always start off as a scientist though. He, a long time ago, started to become a doctor, went to medical school, but failed out. His father was a doctor and he wanted him to become that. He then decided that he wanted to become a teacher and he substituted for a while, but that didn't work out either. So he eventually, with some scientist friends, was invited to go on a journey on this big sailing vessel called the Beagle. And the Beagle went all around the world, went down to Africa especially, and went to the Galapagos Islands. And he studied a lot of birds. He's known for the finches on the mainland and on the islands and how they're similar but different. So this is where he gets his book, which is in bold right here, that says On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. So what he talked about and what he noticed in studying animals was that species evolve over time and they change and adapt to their environment so they can survive. This is a natural thing. Now we know with humans, we can speed that process up. So the two things that he talked about and what he coined terms was the word evolution and natural selection. So the chapter in the book really talks a lot about those two concepts. So what they thought, if we keep moving down through, one of the other scientists, Lamarck, he's also a big name, but you'll hear Darwin the most. Lamarck also thought about evolution, and he talked to Darwin a lot about both of their theories, and Liddell did as well, and they thought that life and the earth changed slowly over time. No one really thought about that before. They weren't discovering fossils as much as we are now. They're not studying them as much. So when they started seeing these things, they thought, wait a minute, what is all of this? So Lamarck, Liddell, and also Darwin were big influences of that time period. So here is a young Darwin, and this is where he traveled all these regions of the world. And there's that voyage of the Beagle. So there's the Beagle, that red line, that ship that went around. And he did more instead of scientific theory and process, where remember we had to have an observation, we had to make a question, we had to have a hypothesis, we had to go through experiment, collect data. Instead of doing that, since he was a naturalist, he sat and had a journal and a field guide, and he wrote down things he saw every day. So it might be 5 red finches. Some have long beaks, some have short beaks. Then he saw 4 brown finches. Some have long claws on their feet, some have short. So he did more of a discovery science, is what that is, kind of people watching, rather than a scientific theory. And he did that on the ship, the Beagle. So another big thing he saw was all these types of beetles. And he noticed, if you look at all of the large ones on the left-hand side, they have a black head, a brown body, legs, and antenna. But 2 of them have big pinchers on the front. So he called this a part of evolution, and that was naturally selected on these animals, and that they changed over time to base their needs on whether it was eating or getting away from various predators. But Darwin studied a lot of that. And the way that they evolved was by this concept called natural selection. You can't evolve unless you are naturally selecting genes, and we naturally select them all the time. We want corn to grow bigger and have more kernels. We want rice and other wheats to grow fast. We want our animals like cattle to grow fast. So we're causing evolution by naturally selecting strong genes. So he thought that too, except he didn't know a lot about genes. Mendel was just coming out with genetics and calling them characters. So this was a big science in the 1800s that was coming along. So one of the things that Darwin also looked at was populations. And here we have overpopulation of these zebras. And if you're overpopulating an area, think about it. All of those animals are going to be eating all of the vegetation, drinking all of the water, and they're going to starve. Kind of like my yard. Do you also have tons of squirrels and rabbits in your yard right now? Because I have an immense amount of them. And what's happening is the rabbits are eating all my flowers and all of my bushes, and I don't like that very much. And soon they'll have nothing to eat because they ate it all. So it's sort of like this big population of zebras, and that the environment can only hold so many. And if it gets too much in that area, the environment can't sustain them any longer. So the weak ones start to die. So those strong traits that help them survive, that's passed on to the next generation that breed and have babies. So some of these limited resources that can cause big populations to die are things down here that says food, water, shelter, and that could be for any animal, but we think of ourselves a lot. Sunlight, all of that needs to stay constant. If it doesn't, that's where populations might start to die off. Another one is competition. So are there, especially predators, is one big lion, the king of the lions, is he eating all of the prey where the other male lions are not? So that competition is going to change the population. What about variety? So they say that no two individuals are alike. When we look at natural selection, we can think about this as something like COVID as well. So viruses, bacteria, they all go through the same thing. You know about MRSA, you know about some of the bacteria that can't be cured of antibiotics right now or are having a hard time being cured by them. That's because those organisms, bacteria and viruses, are being naturally selected as well, so the stronger ones survive. And those might be the ones that are antibiotic resistant. So this does happen in many environments. If we look at another form that's helping the population survive or decline is heritability, which means what is being inherited and likely to be passed on to the next generation. Evolution, these traits will evolve over time, similar to people are getting smaller and smaller appendixes, tonsils smaller and smaller. Does that mean the next generation we won't have any of that? So that would be a type of evolution over time. When we look at who is evolving, it's not the individual. I am not going to evolve to be an 8-foot Amazon woman with crazy hunting skills. That's not going to happen. Now, over time, sorry, my dogs are going to play and make noise soon. Over time, my children's children or great-grandchildren might evolve, but one person is not going to evolve. It needs more time for a trait or a gene to actually make it stance. Otherwise, you're not going to see it. With our evolution, again, another concept with it is artificial selection. Now, we've been doing it for a long time. That's our corn we manipulate. It's the rice we manipulate to grow in areas that never grew before. We also artificially select dogs. Think about how many breeds of dogs there are. There's Great Dane dogs that are size of little ponies. There's dogs that are tiny little dogs. There's teacup dogs that can fit in this mug and disappear inside because that's how tiny they are. So there's all kinds of dogs. They weren't made that way through evolution and natural selection. We artificially selected that trait in that dog. Some dogs are good for hunting. Some dogs are family dogs. Some dogs are guard dogs. Those are all artificial selections we have done over time. And here's one of those. So in the past, DNA suggests that all dogs came from wolves and that they were slowly domesticated over time, where these dogs are not wolves anymore, but some of their common DNA is showing that's the ancestor they came from. And we have so many breeds, right? Talked a little bit about antibiotics and resistance. Moving on. Here is Darwin's observations again about evolution, natural selection. These are all of his content that he studied. So if there's limited resources like sun or food or water, if there's overproduction of animals in the area, you're going to lose food and other resources. Is there competition between the animals? Is there some sort of gene that's inherited for heritability? Those are all his concepts that go into that. Fossils we get into in this chapter 2, and fossils we know, we've seen them since they were a kid, or we've heard about them, or read about them, or saw Jurassic Park. And these fossils are when an organism dies and it falls into a certain type of sediment. Sediment is leftover soil of some kind. Now, if the soil and this bedrock, which is showing this picture, is made out of clay or mud, it will preserve the animal's bones, which are all minerals. So the skin, the muscles, they rot, they go away, but the bones, which are minerals, are left behind and they solidify more into a mineral deposit like a rock. So the only way that can happen is if they're in a type of bedrock that is sandstone or mudstone. So you can't go to the beach and find a fossil. It's not going to work, right? And you're not going to usually find one in a mountain unless the mountain has either sand or mudstone. So those naturally, like this fossilized fish, happens. We have a lot. So here's a trilobite. A trilobite is a tiny organism that used to live in the oceans. Trilobite kind of reminds you of a silverfish. If you've had silverfish in your house, tiny little creatures. Well, this is an ancestor of them. And the trilobite, actually, if you go up Route 61 into Deer Lake, Pennsylvania used to be underwater, and there's a lot of trilobites that are in that area in Pennsylvania. So they get compressed over time, and every layer here that it's showing you is a layer of time. So the oldest is at the bottom because it rains and there's storms, another layer of soil comes on the top, and then years later another layer of soil is on the top. So the newest soil and fossils at the top, the oldest is at the bottom. So fossils, how can we know that fossils are old? Like when Darwin and some of his scientists like Lindell and Laramec found fossils and noticed things like that from their colleagues, how do they know they're old? How do they not know that a dog just died and this is the fossil of the dog and that it's not a wolf from a million years ago? Well, what they do is they have a testing called radiometric dating. Inside of all of our bones, we have carbon. We're carbon-based. Carbon deteriorates over time, and it's very slow. We have learned from the past that we can date how this carbon deteriorates. And then we have a chart that lists it, so we can, with a very educated guess, tell when something was around based on that radiometric dating. But you do need the bones of something left over. So here is a baby mammoth that they had found, of course a dinosaur. These are dinosaur footprints. There's a dinosaur park up in Connecticut that has footprints like this preserved. It's very small, but it's a neat place to see some of these things. So seeing some of these fossils shows us that there was evolution, that things transitioned over time, and we have similar lineages. Like dolphins are mammals, and if you look at the lineage of a dolphin, you can see that their flippers and their fins look very similar to our arms and legs, so that mammals share very similar characteristics. With another concept with our fossils, here's our biogeography, meaning that bio is life, geography, think of where in the world this is going to be, so life as it's based in the world. And where are T-Rexes found in the world? Is it Maine, Ireland, and parts of northern India? Where would these be? Would they all line up geographically the same? Are they only found in Australia? Are they only found in the Galapagos Islands? That would be biogeography. You're studying where a certain organism lives. And here we have 100 million years ago, the Earth was thought to be smaller, had a slightly more dense atmosphere, a little bit more gravity, and Pangaea was a large landmass that our Earth was. And over time, as the Earth got bigger, our gravity changed a little bit, the land broke up. But if you were to take all of these pieces that are on this globe and put them back together, you can look at the globe today and see it's like a puzzle piece. Australia fits into the bottom of India and China and Korea. You can see that North and South America fit together, that we fit back into Europe and to Africa. And these animals are in certain areas of the world. The last concept is called comparative anatomy. If we took a chicken egg like this with a chicken developing, if we took a human egg, if we took a dog egg, and we took a dolphin in the same stage of gestation, we would all look the same at certain points in time. That's considered embryology, the study of embryos, because we're all mammals. We look very similar the first couple of stages during pregnancy and embryonic development. Then we get into what's called comparative anatomy. Anatomy is the study of the body, so comparative is comparing. So on these two, the chicken embryo and the human embryo, you can see there's an eye. That would be comparative anatomy. You can see that there are pharyngeal pouches, and here's the pouches, which means it's going to be our mouth, our ears, and our eustachian tube. We have a tail, right, a tailbone, and they have a tail, so it's called comparative anatomy. Between organisms, what parts of the body are very similar? And with mammals, there's a lot. Here's another comparative anatomy piece. We have a bat, a porpoise, and a human. All the bones and the way they're colored are the same bones for the organism. So if these are the fingers, all the fingers are this orangey color, and the wrist bones and the arm bones. So again, similar in how we're related. I will do one more short video so you can see the rest of the chapter. Be right back.